Hi, I'm Joanne May, and I'm so glad that you're joining me today. I have made 4 different designs for watercolor Valentine's cards, and if you'd like, please join me by painting along. And I'd also be ever so appreciative if you would like and subscribe to this channel. We'll have lots more projects coming up. I will be posting at least 1 a week, sometimes twice a week, with watercolor and calligraphy, and sometimes the combination of the two. So let's get started. So I have a 9 by 12 sheet of watercolor paper. This is Canson watercolor paper. It's 140 pound, and it is cold pressed, but it's a combination of cotton and fibers, so it's not 100% cotton paper, but it works really well for cards. And so I have this divided into 4 sections. I will be putting a little bit of a border here, but not around the outside edges. Actually, all of it is pretty much to the inside. This one goes closer to the edges, so I may adjust just a little bit on that one. 2 of them are going to be in portrait mode, so right side up, long ways, and 2 are going to be in landscape mode, so I'll be turning my board around. The first one I have here is an I Love You. So what I'm going to do before I start painting is take a number 8 micron pen. It's a thicker pen. It works really nicely for working with watercolor. It's archival ink, it's acid free, and it will give a really smooth lettering. So I'm going to do the lettering first. I love you. So those letters will stand out then when I go to the painting process, and the strings will be in a different color, so the lettering will be black and it'll stand out. My next step is to begin painting. So I have my palette here and my water here off to the side. I don't need a very large brush. This is a small to medium size. I think it's a number 4 round, and I'm just going to choose some colors. Let's start with red. Why not? Red hearts is always a nice thing to start with. Excuse me a moment. Move this palette over to the other side. I haven't done it on this side before, but since I'm right-handed, it seems to make more sense than having it in the way. So, just doing some pretty wet painting here. I want to be careful to try not to get too much water that creates some blooms, but if I do, I can always fix that. And these hearts are going to have little balloon tails on them, which will give it more of a sort of fun look. And the other thing I like to do after I get it painted in while it's still wet is clean my brush, dry it off just a little bit, and then just take a little swig out of the side, because that makes it look like it's more rounded and shiny like a balloon. So my next one, I think I'm going to use, that was Pyrrol Red. This is Alizarin Crimson. So I'm going to stick with the reds and pinks for this whole card. Here's a darker shade. This is a little pinkish. Lots of water, lots of paint on the brush. So I'm going to be speeding this up now so that you can just sit back and enjoy either painting along or just watching. I have the titles of the colors, names of the colors, in some subtitles as I'm painting each of these reds and pinks and oranges for this particular card. The next card is going to have a lot of different shades for the hearts in that design. This one is just so nice to be able to make those little white swooshes that create the dimension of the balloon. The roundness of the balloon gives it a little bit more interest than a flat red color that's all the same all the way across. You saw me grab a tissue just then. Sometimes if the paint isn't coming up very well, particularly with the lighter shades of the reds and pinks, it's really easy to take just a damp brush, wipe off most of the moisture, scrub a little bit in that area, and then touch it with a tissue, and the tissue lifts out the color better even than the brush itself. Now I'm ready to add the strings, and so I'm getting a Tombow Fudenosuke pen in a blue color. These are wonderful pens. They have a very sharp point, and I'll just be using the point of it, but they're also brush pens, so that as you learn to use them and begin to lay the brush a little bit flatter on the paper, you can create some really thick lines and also these thin lines. So it's quite a bit like doing pointed pen calligraphy if you learn the technique of how to use the pens. In this case, I'm just using it because it's blue and it was handy. They're archival ink pens as well, so I highly recommend you check those out. So I'm just taking the end of the balloon and connecting it into the letters, the I and now love at the top and at the bottom. I want those strings to pretty much connect at the bottom, and you'll see in just a moment after I get all of the strings drawn in with their loops and their curves, I will put a bow at the bottom then to tie them together as if you're carrying a whole balloon bunch in your hand. But it's just really delightful when there's a message in those shapes of the strings. And here's the last one, the little pink one. This one I had to fit through that skinny little area, so I just made it wavy instead of loopy. And now I will add some little tendril strings coming out of that intersection where the balloon looks like it was tied. And just going in every which direction. I like the little loop-de-loops, and some go up, some go down, as if there's wind blowing them in different directions. And then the tie comes at the bottom. In this tie, I first did it just with the blue pen, and then later I looked at it and I thought it needed more dimension. And since I had the I love you in black, I thickened up the downstrokes on the words, and they stood out better, and then I added just a little black to the bow. So there's my message, and I think it looked better after that. Next, I will be working on my second design, which is going to be a similar idea with Be Mine. That will be the message, and then some hearts, but this time they're going to be hearts that are growing out of the ground. So I'm beginning just like the other one with the lettering. I had penciled this in much too close to the left hand side, so rather than erasing and going again at the paper with my pencil, I just decided I could do this by hand and tried to
think what the positioning needed to be to move those letters over, and later you'll see that I needed to move one of the hearts that's growing out of the ground over a little bit. But do what you need to do if you want to be sure that you get the design to come out the way you like it, the way it's pleasing to you. Then erasing is not difficult on watercolor paper, especially on 140 pound like this is. It can take quite a lot of abuse without getting damaged. I like to use the kneaded erasers. That's the KNEAD, kneaded, where you kind of manipulate the eraser in your hand and it absorbs the pencil marks or whatever you're trying to erase into the center of the eraser, and then the outer part of the eraser is clean and it doesn't leave behind any eraser nubs that you have to brush off of your paper. I really like using that type of an eraser, so feel free. Also, I would recommend not using a very hard pencil mark for that reason. If you have to erase, it's better if you've used a softer lead pencil. Now what you'll see me doing, again, I'm speeding it up just a bit. It wasn't this fast when I was painting. I just thought it would be nice for you to see the whole process. I'm dropping in color at the base of each heart. Usually a darker shade. I started with yellow and added in a little green, so I have sort of a greenish yellow, and then I added blue at the bottom, which goes really well with yellow and green. And it's very wet when I drop in that color at the bottom, so I'm putting it kind of where I want it, but I know that the water is going to continue moving the pigment around as it dries. So the excitement to me of watercolor is that you're not always in control, and it's really fun to see what happens when you do use a good amount of water with pigment. And you can tilt the paper one side or the other. You can just let it sit in a puddle and see what happens, or you can try to control it by putting a damp brush into it. Right here I'm adding some red at the bottom of the blue, and it's not coming out very well. I was hoping for a little more purpley look. As it dried, it started to look a little bit more purple at the bottom, but it doesn't always look the way you expect it to, which is also, to me, very, very interesting and very exciting. So I'm choosing colors that are not traditional, other than this one right here where I'm using red, but I wanted to use orange and green and yellow and blue. This one I added a yellow bottom, so there is lighter color for the bottom, and frankly with watercolor it's not typical to put a lighter color over a darker color. Because of the transparency, you'll see that dark color come through so much that you almost miss the lighter color. You can see that little bit of yellow which mingles with the red that makes it look more orangey. All that's going on, and I'm just letting the watercolor do its thing. These blues, the lighter blue there, are it's a combination of cerulean blue and cobalt blue, which those colors are really good for making skies in paintings if you're doing a landscape. But I was being pretty aggressive with my brush, and especially that cerulean blue is a harder paint. It dries hard in my palette, so I have to scrub it a little bit more to get the pigment onto my brush. And so it left some bubbles. You might be able to see those bubbles, and as it dried, it left a little bit of those little dots, so it gave it a completely different look than the other colors. And that is something that you will learn more and more about as you do watercolor, that different pigments are made from different substances, different types of natural rock and earth substances, and sometimes they leave some granulation behind and you get texture coming through, and other times they're very smooth and go onto the paper without very much texture but a more pure color. So depending on the look that you're going for, try out all of your paints in a variety of ways with more water or less water, and these small cards are a really good way to learn more about how your paints behave when they're put down on paper. Okay, so I have all of these different colors of flowers and a variety of them. I asked my husband, if I was going to give you one of these cards, which one would you like? And he said, oh, I bet you could guess. And I thought, oh no, I better not. So he liked all four of them. You'll see the final page. If you want to fast forward to the end of the video, I have a photograph of the four. But I guessed one, and then another, and another, and another, and we were kind of laughing about the whole thing. And the last one I thought he was going to like is this one that I'm finishing up here, with all of these different colors. So I learned something about him. We've only been married almost 50 years, and I still don't know what his preferences are of color. He liked the cleanliness of it and the lettering on top of the variety of color. So okay, so this is where I got out of screen a little bit, and I apologize for that. I have some subtitles in here with instructions, but I will tell you also as you're watching this in action, I have a penciled in big heart on this pane here that I'm working on, and the first step is to paint flowers inside of the heart shape. But of course, when you're doing a flower, you're not really thinking about the heart shape. You just don't want to go outside of that shape if you're going to do this design. So start with some fairly large heart flowers, and because it's Valentine's Day and because it's a heart and it's going to be a Valentine's card, I used a lot of reds and pinks for the flowers. You can choose to use whatever colors you like, and if you like the look of that bee mine with all of the different colors of hearts, feel free to make your flowers in this design a variety of colors as well. But there's nothing really magical about doing these flowers other than you saw maybe on the center flower there that I laid the brush down almost flat on the paper and just rolled it to get some of that feathering like the edges of a flower would look. But I'm not trying to make it look like any particular type of flower. I just want it to look like a suggestion of a flower. So I did 3 or 4, 3 larger ones, 1 medium-sized one. Now I'm adding in just a dot here or there, and usually in 2s or 3s. The dots are going to eventually look a little more like flower buds growing, because I will be adding a background and then also some stems and leaves, and I will make those little dots into some flower buds. Right here I'm deciding I need more flowers, not just buds, so I'm adjusting as I go, changing up the shades. You see I'm grabbing some yellow now, and I had red, a light red, a pink, and an Alizarin Crimson, which is the darker red, and yellow, and it doesn't really look like there's that much color in this, but that's also one of the beautiful things I think about painting, is that you can use these colors in combination. You don't even have to mix them on the palette. You see how dirty my palette is? I'm constantly mixing on the palette to get just the right color for certain things, but for a project like this, you want to just have fun with it. And if mixing is kind of a nuisance for you, you don't have to mix. You can actually put 2 colors on your brush, get your brush wet, dip into one color, dip right away into another color, and then go to the paper and put it down and see what it looks like. That's a lot of fun to do with watercolor. Now I'm adding a background. I've made this particular heart with the flowers in it a few different times, and you can use any shade you want of the background. I try to make it look less like Christmas, so I'm going with a very yellowish green here. I had to mix my yellow, pretty strong yellow, into my green. You can mix the yellow into a blue, but just use a touch of blue if you want this shade. Or you can go with a more traditional sap green is what I would say, would look more like a Christmas type of a green, or hooker's green is another one that's very Christmassy looking. Or you could put a blue background or a yellow background or any shade that you like here, because you have the shape of a heart that you're putting it into. One thing to keep in mind when you do a background, and you can kind of see a little bit of what I'm going to mention here on the left-hand side of this heart, is to try to keep your brush really wet. You see, as I touched that red flower, the red is now bleeding into the green a little bit. I like that look, and I think that actually looks more natural, watercolor style, a little bit loose style. I'm not trying to make specific flowers look a certain way. But that left side has a line in it. You can kind of see what watercolorists would call a hard line, very close to where I am right now. And that's because I let the edge of the paint, as I was painting in that background, dry in that one little area before I went back to it to continue the green. So try to keep that edge wet at all times if you want a smooth look. I didn't mind having that little edge there, and so that's another artistic decision you can make if you like the way it looks. It almost looks like window panes of stained glass. That's what I would say. Yes, that's what I intended there. So that you get some lines, but you also get some interesting varieties of colors, shades of the same color. Now you see some of the stems going in. I'm using pretty much a straightforward sap green, which is a little darker. The paper is not dry at this point, so you see that when I put the green, the darker green in, it's bleeding out just a little bit into the background, which also is an interesting look. I like that fading away, that bleeding out look, with a harder line on top of it. That gives the green stems and leaves a little more dimension. So you see me going over with a little harder line green right there on the edge of the leaves and on the edge of the stems. So that combination gives a nice look. So I'm fiddling around, adding more to the flower, adding a little more color here and there. And then as I was finishing up with these buds, this is a place where I was making some buds and adding some green around them. So, and you'll see me do that again right here. Really simple, just do a little V underneath an oval shape. The oval is red, the V is green, and then just draw a curved line, and there you have a cute little bud. And so, thinking shapes more than botanicals. This isn't a botanical study. I'm not trying to make things look like particular types of flowers. Now, I made a mess right there because I put the side of my hand into the yellow-green in the background. And so I wanted to clean that up, and I just took a little dark green, and yes, I outlined. That's something that is debatable in this watercolor world. Do you want to outline your work and make it look like it's cut out, or do you want it to look more natural? In a card like this, in a Valentine heart that I'm making, what I decided looked the best is to put a little bit of an outline here and there. So you see, if you're looking closely, you can see where there are some places where there is no outline and other places where there is an outline. On to the next card. This one is also going to be in landscape mode. I drew a circle. You saw I showed that inside of my masking tape. It was just the perfect size, so I just drew a circle. But I'm not drawing a circle with the paint. You see what I'm doing is just making squiggly lines. I'm thinking in my mind that this is going to look a little bit like a wreath. It's going to have a variety of colors. And so I used a number 4 brush. Now I'm going, there's the 4 with the 2. The number 2 is what I'm going to paint hearts with. But I didn't really like the look of the way that wreath turned out. I used started with burnt sienna, and then I used burnt umber, which is a little darker brown. Then I used some neutral tint, which is a dark, it's almost black, and it neutralizes a color into a darker mode. So I use that. You can kind of see the darker shade there. And then I thought, no, this needs some green now. So I was just experimenting with a whole lot of different colors, and I knew that I wanted a heart themed wreath. So I didn't want to go wider and wider and wider with the wreath. I wanted to keep it rather thin so that the main focus would be on these little baby hearts. And so I just left it. But the whole time I'm putting these hearts in, I just kept thinking, something's got to change about this wreath. I wanna do some little sprigs of the wreath sticking into the center maybe, and some of it sticking out to the outer edges. And so I went ahead and used a variety of shades of reds and pinks and dark pinks. And I stacked some of those hearts, and I put some alone. I made them different sizes. I made them open in a few cases, just an outline of a heart rather than coloring them in. They go really fast. Not this fast, this is a sped up version, but it doesn't take much to create a baby heart like that. Now I'm adding some of those, actually some vines, coming out of the wreath and connecting to the hearts. All really fun, and it's just so easy, and there is no right or wrong way to do it, just whatever you want to do. You probably could never get too many hearts on that page. I'm looking at it right now thinking, I could have put more in there, I think, here or there. But I am satisfied, quite satisfied with how it turned out in the end. And I will tell you a couple of things that I did that you won't see on this video. Okay, so I'm just adding more light, fine lines as I go around. I'm doing it with a lot of green. Also now, big step. Took a very large brush, only wet, didn't have any paint on it, and I just smeared some of that background of that wreath. Now I'm starting to like the way the wreath looks. It has lots of dimension because it has all of those different colors. And so I got to that point where I dabbed out some of it, and I really, really liked the way it was going. Still not satisfied yet, so I'm adding some sparkles. This sparkle glue is the best thing ever. I highly recommend that you get some if you like making cards. It comes in this, this is a clear sparkle, and it has a set. If you want to buy it, I think I bought it at Michael's, and there was a set of 3 with clear, gold, and silver. If you're a sparkly kind of person, I just love to pick this up, especially if I'm trying to think, what else does this need? So adding the sparkles, you can't really see it very well because this is the clear version, and it also has to dry before it really shines. So don't be too disappointed if you're putting it on wet and it's just not looking the way you think it should look. It will get more sparkly as it dries. All right, so here I have what I thought was going to be the final wreath, and then I got the idea that those little hearts needed to stand out more, and I took a very fine black pen, and you can see there in the final product, and I outlined every one of those hearts, and it just popped. So there we have it, the whole 4 paintings, and I hope that you've enjoyed watching me do these. Some of it is sped up as you saw, but I hope that you have enough information and could follow along well enough, and I hope you've enjoyed spending a little time making some Valentines for your loved ones. Thanks for joining me.